You won't believe what just happened at Capitol Hill today. During a seemingly routine discussion on the topic, does a degree define legislative competence? Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stunned the room into silence by openly mocking Senator John Neely Kennedy's educational credentials. But the drama didn't stop there. The atmosphere flipped when an unexpected figure appeared, none other than the law professor who taught Kennedy in college. To the shock of all the senators and attendees, this professor revealed a bombshell secret, hidden for decades and now exposed at the heart of America's power center. At the event, AOC was invited as a special speaker representing the progressive voice with her self-made journey from a working-class family in the Bronx. And a bachelor's degree from Boston University, John Kennedy, the Louisiana senator, was present as the opposing speaker representing conservative views. He proudly held a law degree from Georgetown University and a certificate from the University of Oxford, UK. The audience that day was a diverse mix: educators from universities, student representatives, parents from across the country, and notably, political journalists who typically paid little attention to education issues until they learned AOC. And Kennedy would face off from her opening words. AOC delivered her message deftly. "I believe in education," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "But I don't believe a degree from Oxford automatically qualifies you to make policy for working people like my family," whom Senator Kennedy seems to overlook. A few nods of agreement came from the progressive side of the audience. Kennedy didn't interrupt. When it was his turn, he spoke slowly, his southern drawl warm. "I don't represent privilege, I represent truth. And the truth is, many people like me have to work twice as hard just to be seen as ordinary if there's injustice. It's not an education policy, but in the assumption that we're unworthy." Neither mentioned the other by name, but everyone caught the subtext. A conservative audience member in the front row whispered to their neighbor, "What school did she go to? Just Boston University, right?" A young reporter quickly searched on their phone, then fell silent upon learning AOC graduated with honors from Boston University, with an economics thesis on income inequality that won a school award. One outlet had written about her, the woman who made Congress listen with a 10-minute speech on environmental justice. Meanwhile, few knew a detail about Kennedy. In his final year at Georgetown, he had requested an extension for his thesis due to personal circumstances, which was granted as a special exception. The media didn't dig deeper, as his inspiring, rags-to-riches story from Louisiana fit the narrative too well. No one said it aloud, but the atmosphere had the audience quietly wondering, who's really under the microscope here? AOC sat in the middle of the room, her hands gently resting on the table, with only a notebook and a blue ink pen in front of her. Kennedy glanced at her once before the cameras started rolling. She didn't react, only meeting his gaze with a silent, razor-sharp look. A political analyst whispered to a colleague, "They're not arguing. But this isn't a forum, this is a chess game," and AOC just made a bold move. When AOC questioned Kennedy's education, the room was stunned. But Kennedy, as usual, didn't flinch. He knew that with a strong enough truth, there was no need to rush to speak, and if politics could overlook truth, intelligence could not. AOC adjusted her microphone, her voice calm and deliberate, as if she had meticulously prepared for this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her eyes sweeping the room, "I'm not here to attack anyone personally. I just want to ask a fair question. Are we trusting lawmakers to shape America's educational future because they truly have academic competence, or just because they have a compelling story?" As her question landed, the sound of furious typing erupted from the press section. A few audience members nodded, others frowned. AOC didn't let the silence linger. She held up a printed sheet. "This is an anonymous social media post where former students and faculty share information about the education of public figures who study law. This post raises questions about whether Congressman Torres truly earned his degree through merit or through special favors." Murmurs arose from the progressive side of the audience as AOC held up the anonymous social media post, implying that Senator John Neely Kennedy may have received special favors during his time at Georgetown University. The post, allegedly from a former professor, questioned whether Kennedy's academic record was truly transparent. Kennedy remained silent, only tilting his head slightly, his eyes fixed on the paper in AOC's hand. An event organizer spoke up. "Is that source reliable?" AOC replied, her voice calm. "I'm not saying it's entirely accurate, but I think it's worth discussing." especially when we're talking about legislative competence and the value of a degree. The cameras from news outlets slowly turned to Kennedy. He didn't smile or rush to respond. He flipped a page in the notebook in front of him, then spoke in a deep, clear voice that resonated through the room. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, please clarify. What do you want me to prove? A degree, a ranking, or my entire journey? No one laughed. No one clapped. But his question cut through the polished veneer of the carefully staged debate like a sharp blade. AOC didn't back down. She leaned forward, her voice firm. If my education was ever questioned, I'd be ready to lay it all bare, good or bad. But when someone dodges a simple question, it's usually because they have something to hide. Some audience members began to lean toward AOC, nodding in agreement. Someone whispered, "She's got a point." The divide in the room grew clearer. Progressives rallied behind AOC, while conservatives stood by Kennedy. A veteran journalist jotted in their notebook, "A battle of wits disguised as fairness." Kennedy still didn't respond immediately. He looked up, meeting AOC's eyes directly for the first time in the forum, not angry, but with a gaze strong enough to make her pause before continuing. The silence stretched until it was broken by the scrape of a chair as an audience member stood. A young student, slight build and wearing a light green guest badge, stood up. His voice wasn't loud, but it was steady despite a slight tremor. "Sorry, I'm a freshman political science student. I didn't plan to speak. But if a good education is the standard for making good policy, then why do some people with prestigious degrees support unjust policies?" The room fell silent. Some turned to look at him. Others looked at AOC. No one answered. No one dared. The question wasn't aimed solely at AOC, but it shattered the momentum she had held. AOC avoided the student's gaze, looking down at the table, then quickly regained her composure, reiterating, "I'm only asking if Senator Kennedy is willing to be as transparent as I've always been." But her words no longer carried the same weight. A woman in the third row, wearing a gray coat, whispered to the person next to her. That student asked the question no one dared to. The shift wasn't loud, but it crept in like an undercurrent, making the audience start to scrutinize AOC's intentions, not because she was wrong, but because she was too sharp, too prepared, like a carefully calculated media strategy for Kennedy. His silence was no longer defensive. It became a statement. The PBS camera slowly panned to his hand, tightly gripping a black ink pen. A commentator later wrote in an analysis, "It was the most powerful moment of silence in the forum." While people argued about degrees, one person quietly proved that true intelligence knows when to hold back, waiting for a moment that carries more weight. And then, at that very moment, something unexpected happened. A forum coordinator approached the moderator's table, whispering something the cameras didn't catch, but the moderator, Clara Bennett's face shifted from calm to astonished. She tapped the microphone lightly, her voice slightly hesitant. "We've just been informed that an unregistered guest wishes to speak, with information directly relevant to Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's question. That person is Professor Robert Hayes, former law professor at Georgetown University." The room seemed to hold its breath. AOC tilted her head slightly, a flicker of unease in her eyes. Kennedy closed his eyes for a second, not to hide, but as if he knew this moment was coming. Professor Hayes stepped forward, tall, with silver hair, holding a stack of documents. He didn't need a microphone. His voice was deep and clear. "I apologize for not registering in advance, but I'm here as someone who once taught Senator Kennedy and also reviewed a project by Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez." He paused, opened the stack of documents, and pulled out an old, carefully preserved sheet. "This is Kennedy's law thesis, one of the finest at Georgetown." AOC looked at the paper, her hand tightening around her pen. Hayes continued, "But I also have an economics paper by Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, written when she was a student at Boston University. It's impressive, but she once requested an extension due to personal difficulties. Kennedy, on the other hand, never asked for special treatment." The room fell silent. Kennedy gave a faint smile as first in the forum. AOC took a deep breath, preparing to close her remarks with a carefully rehearsed line. "If we want lawmakers to represent the pinnacle of our education system, they should at least be a model for it." She looked up, her eyes meeting Kennedy's. But before she could continue, a voice rang out from the back of the room, not loud, but enough to make the entire audience pause. "I believe I can provide an answer for him," the voice said. All eyes turned to the back. A tall man with silver hair walked calmly from the end of the room. He wore a long coat, his left hand holding a briefcase. The room held its breath as he approached the podium, holding a stack of documents, his right hand resting on an intricately carved wooden cane. No one recognized him at first. It wasn't until the coordinator confirmed his identity that the room took notice. Professor Robert Hayes, former law professor at Georgetown University, AOC froze, a flash of surprise crossing her face before she quickly glanced toward the organizers. Kennedy didn't turn around. He only let out a soft breath, as if releasing a weight from his chest. Professor Hayes stepped to the center of the room. He didn't need a microphone. His deep, deliberate voice commanded attention. "I apologize for not registering in advance," he began, "but I'm here as someone who once taught Senator Kennedy and also evaluated a project by Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez at a policy workshop." He paused, carefully opening his stack of documents and pulling out an old sheet preserved in a plastic sleeve. "This isn't a transcript. I brought something else." He held up the paper, John Kennedy's law thesis, titled Justice and Constitutional Order. Awarded the best law essay of 1975 at Georgetown. The room was utterly silent. Hayes continued, "This thesis was written while Kennedy's father was battling illness and his family faced financial hardship. I know this because I was the one who suggested he request an extension, but he refused. He said, 'If I can't complete it in adversity, I don't deserve this degree.'" A soft sob came from the back of the room. The PBS camera panned to a young female student wiping tears from her cheek. Ayag looked down at the table, her hands clenched, saying nothing. Hayes turned to AOC, his voice still calm. "I also read Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's economics paper at a 2010 workshop when she was a student at Boston University. It was impressive, but she requested an extension due to personal pressures. I don't fault her for that, but today, I want to clarify the truth for someone who has stayed silent too long." He paused, then with a voice firm as a hammer strike, said, "I mentored both, but only one used hardship as a reason to delay. And that person was not Kennedy." No one dared breathe. The statement needed no justification, no further explanation. It cut through the room, not dividing right from wrong, but distinguishing between self-earned achievement and recounted achievement. Hayes said nothing more. He placed Kennedy's thesis on the table, gave him a slight nod, and turned to leave. No one clapped. No one stopped him. The atmosphere was too solemn, as if any movement could shatter the moment. AOC remained seated, trying to mask her tension by clasping her hands on the table. But the cameras caught her pursed lips and her eyes for the first time. Looking down, Kennedy, in contrast, gave a simple smile, his gaze regaining confidence. A journalist whispered, "Hayes just changed the whole game." The shift wasn't loud, but it crept in, making the audience view AOC differently, not because she was wrong, but because her sharpness now seemed like an overly calculated strategy for Kennedy. His silence had become his strength. The CNN camera slowly panned to Kennedy's hand holding a black ink pen, resting lightly beside the thesis. An analyst later wrote, "That was the defining moment of the forum. While people debated degrees, one person proved that true intelligence knows when to wait for the right moment to shine." The audience remained silent, as if waiting for something greater. A student whispered to a friend, "I didn't expect Kennedy to have a story like that." No one stopped Professor Robert Hayes from leaving. The atmosphere in the room was too solemn, as if any movement could break the moment. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stayed seated, trying to hide her tension by clasping her hands tightly on the table. But the cameras captured her pursed lips and her eyes for the first time. Cast downward, Senator John Neely Kennedy, in contrast, stood up, saying nothing, only giving Hayes a slight nod as he passed by, not to thank him, but as a silent acknowledgement. Some people don't need words to defend themselves because, when the truth is strong enough, someone will always step up to speak for them. The atmosphere in the room after Hayes' remarks no longer resembled a debate forum. No one spoke. Number one moved. Ayag sat motionless, her hands on the table, but her thumb tapped lightly on the edge of her chair, a repeated gesture of someone trying to stay calm. The camera shifted, no longer focusing on Kennedy, but now fixed squarely on AOC. Small beads of sweat began to glisten on her forehead instead of leaving immediately. Professor Hayes turned back to the moderator, Clara Bennett, his voice low but clear. "I didn't want to just say one thing and leave. I think I need to clarify something the media often overlooks. A few audience members looked up. Hayes nodded slightly, his gaze not meeting AOC's. But each word he spoke seemed to carve directly into her image. In the spring semester of 2010, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, then a student at Boston University, sent me a long email requesting an extension for her economics research paper. Due to personal pressures after her father's passing, he said, I agreed. I even offered to write a letter to support her taking the semester off because I believed sometimes a person needs compassion more than a grade. AOC didn't react. She lowered her head slightly, as if trying to hide the tension now visible on her face. Hayes slowly turned to another document. And here is a request from Senator Kennedy during the same period when his father was battling a serious illness. He said he didn't ask to delay submitting his law thesis at Georgetown. He only asked to submit it on time, not early. I remember when he turned it in. His eyes were weary, but he never mentioned his family's circumstances. The camera panned back to Kennedy. He remained silent, but his gaze now locked on Hayes, not seeking validation, but as if confirming that those words were true. An event organizer, an older conservative senator, shook his head slightly, whispering, no one ever told us this. Though soft, the comment triggered a ripple effect. It was as if a layer of paint had been stripped away, revealing the rough brick beneath. Some audience members who had nodded in support of AOC now leaned back in their seats, silent. Their silence was no longer about listening to AOC, but a self-reflection on what they had never questioned. A woman in the public audience section softly sobbed, not loudly, not disruptively, but those around her felt it. The woman was Emily Carter, a former colleague of Kennedy's from his time at a Louisiana law office. She wiped her eyes with a handkerchief, whispering just loud enough for the C-SPAN camera to catch. I worked with him every early morning. I thought he was driven by ambition. I didn't know his father was gravely ill. Professor Hayes still stood there, but his expression softened, as if he were stepping through an unshared memory. Intelligence doesn't lie in where you come from, he said. It lies in what you bring to others, even when you're hurting. There was no applause, no commentary. The entire room sank into silence, as if time had stopped. The Reuters camera zoomed in on AOC's face. For the first time, she couldn't maintain her usual composure. Her lips were tightly pressed. Her gaze lowered, a small gesture, but enough for the online audience to read. Something in her head wavered. The shift in the room unfolded slowly but powerfully. A prominent Boston Globe journalist posted on social media, "We've heard the story of someone using hardship as an excuse, but today we saw someone turn hardship into purpose." A few conservative audience members began to whisper, if Kennedy is that resilient, why did AOC doubt him? The question no longer fit the moment. At the back of the room, a student live streaming the event set down their phone and typed a status, "Today, I learned that intelligence doesn't need to shout. It just needs the right person to speak at the right time." The room seemed frozen, as if time itself had paused. The Reuters camera zoomed in on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's face. For the first time, she couldn't maintain her usual calm demeanor. Her lips were tightly pressed. Her gaze lowered, a small gesture, but enough for millions of online viewers to sense something in her head crumble. The shift in the atmosphere unfolded slowly but powerfully. A prominent Boston Globe journalist posted live on social media, "We've heard someone use hardship as an excuse, but today we witnessed someone turn hardship into strength." A few progressive commentators tried to push back. If Kennedy is so exceptional, why did AOC have to question him? But most stayed silent, as the question no longer fit the moment. At the back of the room, a young student live streaming the event set down their phone and typed a status, "Today, I learned something. Intelligence doesn't need to shout. It just needs the right person to speak at the right time." In the final scene of this segment, the camera slowly panned to Senator John Neely Kennedy. He said nothing. He didn't need to thank Professor Robert Hayes. He didn't show pride. He simply picked up the thesis Hayes had left behind, placing it on the table like a silent proclamation. No one asked him, "Do you have anything to say?" Because no one dared break the heavy silence weighted with the gravity of truth. No one expected that a 3-minute, 48-second video capturing Hayes' brief remarks would become the week's viral centerpiece. Just hours after the forum, an anonymous account posted a clip of the moment Hayes said, "I mentored both, but only one used hardship as a reason to delay, and that person was not Kennedy." With the caption, "Who is truly worthy?" The Video racked up for million views in just 12 hours. Social media platforms exploded with hashtags. Under each viral post, thousands of comments flooded in. What stunned people wasn't just the truth about AOC, but how Kennedy responded. No rebuttal, no appeal to emotion, no reliance on the usual inspirational rhetoric. A political science student at Harvard wrote on social media, "I used to think silence was weakness. Now I see it's the choice of someone with dignity." Mainstream media reacted more slowly, but when they caught up, the divide became clear. The conservative outlet Patriot News aired an edited version of Hayes' speech, cutting out the part about AOC's extension request and keeping only the praise for Kennedy's resilience. This version spread with a provocative title, "Does Adversity Prove Legislative Competence?" In response, dozens of users reposted the original video with captions like, "Another example, when the truth doesn't suit them, they edit it." A Reddit forum on political ethics, or politics, penned an analysis of Kennedy's thesis, highlighting how he argued about constitutional justice with razor-sharp reasoning. A Yale professor commented, "If this thesis had been written by a student at an Ivy League school, it would have been required reading long ago." Then, an unexpected witness spoke up, a verified account belonging to a conservative former Georgetown classmate of Kennedy's. The classmate posted a lengthy Facebook message, which was later shared tens of thousands of times. He wrote, "In our final year, I nearly failed constitutional law. Kennedy took the time to handwrite lecture notes for me, even though his father was hospitalized at the time. I never thanked him enough. I don't believe in privilege based on background, but I believe in fairness. And fairness starts with recognizing who truly works hard." The post went viral, sparking heated discussions. Some asked, if Kennedy is so resilient, why did AOC doubt him? But that question was quickly drowned out by a wave of support for Kennedy. A student at Boston University, where AOC once studied, posted, "I used to admire AOC, but today I see Kennedy as the one who lives by what he says." Progressive media outlets like MSNBC tried to defend AOC by highlighting her journey of overcoming hardship, but they couldn't overshadow Kennedy's story. In the room, the atmosphere remained somber. AOC sat still, her eyes trying to hide disappointment. She said nothing, made no attempt to justify herself, and only looked at Kennedy's thesis on the table, as if questioning herself. In contrast, Kennedy maintained his characteristic simplicity, his gaze calm but confident. A journalist whispered to a colleague, "Hayes didn't just vindicate Kennedy, he reshaped how we see him." The room sank into silence, as if time had stopped. The CNN camera zoomed in on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's face. For the first time, she couldn't maintain her usual sharp confidence. Her lips were tightly pressed, her gaze lowered, a small sign, but enough for millions of online viewers to notice something in her had wavered. The shift in the atmosphere unfolded slowly but powerfully. A veteran Washington Post journalist posted live, "We've seen someone use hardship as an excuse, but today we witnessed someone turn hardship into resolve." A few progressive commentators tried to push back, asking, if Kennedy is truly exceptional, why did AOC have to question him? But most of the audience stayed silent, as the question no longer fit the moment. At the back of the room, a young student live-streaming set down their phone and typed a status, "Today, I learned that intelligence doesn't need to shout. It just needs the right person to speak at the right time." In the final scene of this segment, the camera slowly panned to Senator John Neely Kennedy. He said nothing, didn't thank Professor Robert Hayes, and didn't show triumph. He simply picked up the thesis Hayes left behind, placing it on the table like a silent proclamation. No one asked him, "Do you have anything to say?" Because no one dared break the heavy silence laden with the gravity of truth. No one expected that a 3-minute, 48-second video of Professor Hayes' remarks would become the week's viral centerpiece. Just 4 hours after the forum, an anonymous account posted a clip of Hayes saying, "I mentored both. Only one used hardship as a reason to delay, and that person was not Kennedy." The video, captioned, "Who's truly worthy," hit 4.5 million views in 12 hours. Social media platforms exploded with hashtags, and under each viral post, thousands of comments flooded in. What stunned people wasn't just the truth about AOC, but how Kennedy responded. No arguing, no appeal to emotion, no reliance on familiar, inspirational rhetoric. A law student at Georgetown wrote, "I used to think silence was a sign of weakness. Now I see it's the choice of someone with dignity." Mainstream media reacted more slowly, But when they caught up, the divide became clear. The conservative outlet Liberty Network aired an edited version of Hayes' speech, cutting out the part about AOC's extension request and keeping only the praise for Kennedy's resilience. This version spread with a provocative title, Does Adversity Shape Leadership Competence? In response, dozens of users reposted the original video with captions like, When the truth doesn't suit them, they edit it. A Reddit forum on political ethics pinned an analysis of Kennedy's thesis, emphasizing how he argued about constitutional justice with razor-sharp reasoning. A Stanford professor commented, If this thesis had been written by a student at a top-tier school, it would have been in textbooks long ago. Within 72 hours, universities from Yale, Stanford, Howard, to UCLA issued statements calling for forums on a shared theme. Who do we judge, and by what measure? A poster from Stanford made a strong impression and image of a pen resting on Kennedy's thesis, captioned, Not everyone speaks up, but everyone leaves a mark. AOC's office maintained absolute silence, no new statements, no explanations. Her communications team declined all interview requests, only repeating, The Congresswoman has no comment at this time. That silence, unlike Kennedy's, didn't exude calm. It felt evasive, and the public noticed the difference. A senior CBS reporter wrote, There are two kinds of silence. One silences a room, the other loses its weight amid the media storm. Kennedy did just one thing. No live streams, no talk show appearances, no interviews. At 7 a.m. on Tuesday, he posted a single sentence on his account. Not everyone in the same class learns the same lesson. No hashtags, no tags, no images. Yet, the post was shared over 1.5 million times in 2 days. The New Yorker later published a 4-page article titled The Weight of Silence, analyzing why the most powerful emotional shift came from not speaking. A widely quoted line read, Kennedy didn't rebut AOC. He didn't call for justice. He simply let others speak at the right time, then stood firm. That's not strategy, that's strength. In the days that followed, universities from prestigious institutions like Princeton and Stanford to community colleges in the South began experimenting with a new format, reverse feedback sessions, where students not only evaluated professors through forums, but also in public forums. A dean at the University of Wisconsin shared in an internal meeting, For the first time in years, I realized that sometimes we teach without asking our students what they're learning from how we treat them. An unexpected photo became the symbol of the entire forum, not the moment AOC bowed her head in silence, nor Professor Hayes holding up Kennedy's thesis. It was the moment Hayes stood beside Senator John Neely Kennedy without words. Kennedy didn't look at him, and Hayes didn't look at Kennedy, but his hand rested lightly on the thesis while Kennedy's hand rested on his notebook. No stage lighting, no camera effects, just the people standing together in a room that had just witnessed the year's most significant dialogue. The photo spread rapidly. No caption, no hashtag, but everyone understood its meaning. The newspaper republished it with a single line. Not everyone speaks up, but there's always someone who speaks at the right time. Senator Kennedy didn't appear on any talk shows afterward, no morning TV, no thank you posts. He returned to work, drafting legislation, meeting voters, and occasionally sharing brief thoughts online. A week after the forum, a reporter caught him leaving a closed-door meeting. He was alone, with no media team. When asked, Do you think you won? Kennedy paused for a few seconds, turned, gave a simple smile, and said, I didn't go there to win. I went so someone could learn the lesson they needed. The New Yorker later called the moment between Kennedy and Professor Hayes the political image of the year. Time magazine described it as the silent moment that shifted a nation's tone. In high schools, students began talking more openly about the purpose of learning, not just for high grades, but to understand who's grading and why. That day, as the audience slowly left the room, the PBS camera kept rolling. A final scene, not aired in the official broadcast, made it into a behind-the-scenes clip. Kennedy walked to the exit, hand on the doorknob, but instead of leaving, he turned back. Light from the window illuminated half his face. The forum table in the background, where his thesis still lay. He looked at the now empty room, whispering as if to himself, Sometimes you don't need a transcript to know who learned the right lesson. Meanwhile, AOC remained silent after the forum. Her office issued no new statements, only repeating the familiar response, The Congresswoman has no comment at this time. But that silence, unlike Kennedy's, didn't carry strength, it felt evasive. Some of her supporters tried to defend her, reposting old speeches on social justice. But the media tide had turned toward Kennedy. A student at Boston University, where AOC studied, wrote, "I still respect AOC." But Kennedy showed what real strength is. Educational forums erupted nationwide. A Georgia community college held a discussion titled, "Grades or Actions? What Shapes a Leader?" A Princeton poster became iconic, showing a pen on Kennedy's thesis, caption, "Silence isn't weakness, it's when truth speaks." The story of the confrontation between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator John Neely Kennedy at the Public Forum in Boston, Massachusetts, reflects deep tensions over educational values, backgrounds, and leadership competence in today's American society. The debate on whether a degree defines legislative competence was not just a political clash of wits, but a mirror showing how we judge people often based on biases or surface stories, rather than real actions. Kennedy's powerful silence in the face of AOC's doubts, coupled with Professor Robert Hayes's revelation about his outstanding thesis amid family hardship, underscored that intelligence and dignity lie not just in degrees or words, but in how one overcomes adversity. Conversely, AOC's request for an extension on her research, though reasonable, weakened her argument when she questioned Kennedy's competence, highlighting the danger of criticizing without knowing the full story. The lesson from this story, applicable to real life in the United States in 2025, is to judge people by their actions and context, not just appearances or inspirational narratives. In a polarized society where social media can amplify disputes as seen with Kennedy's post, reaching 1.5 million shares, we should learn to listen and seek truth. As Hayes did with concrete documents, avoid hasty judgments like AOC's, and instead value quiet resilience like Kennedy's refusal of special treatment. Modern life demands fairness and evaluation, especially when everyone carries personal burdens like Kennedy's or AOC's loss of their fathers. Let actions speak for value and always seek truth before forming opinions.